Winter in the Himalayas, December 2018. You are thousands of feet up, surrounded by jagged rock and ice. Specifically, you are on the Nag Tibba overnight trek. The temperatures sit well below freezing. There is absolute silence. And as the sun drops, that bright yellow horizon gives way to a moonlit void. The base camp for this route is undeniably eerie. Trekkers pitch their tents in a barren meadow near a dilapidated, abandoned cottage. Nearby sits an old stone well belonging to a temple dedicated to the serpent god. You are miles from the nearest town. It is a beautiful environment, but it creates a sensory vacuum, a place where the mind is cut off from the usual anchors of the rational world. On this December night, a group of experienced local trekkers retreated into their tent. They lit a lantern, laid out a deck of cards, and tried to escape the bitter cold. Two members, Arti and Rishika, realized a jacket was left outside. They stepped out into the cold. 5 minutes later, they climbed back into the tent, laughing. They explained they had just had a surprisingly deep, serious conversation with Vinay out by the cottage. This was unusual. Vinay was the quietest member of their group, rarely speaking to anyone outside his inner circle. The narrator sat frozen. Because Vinay was sitting right in front of them, dealing the cards. He had never left the tent. If the real Vinay was shuffling cards under the lantern light, it left one question. Who were they speaking to in the dark? The specific details Arti and Rishika reported by the cottage provide a checklist of identifiers that make a simple explanation difficult. The physical details were a precise match. The figure sitting in the moonlight wore a distinct sapphire blue padded jacket. His hair reached his ears. He was even carrying 2 cameras, the exact gear Vinay had brought for the trek. And then there was the voice. The entity spoke in the same soothing, calm pitch as their friend. It even started its sentences with a slight stutter, a specific verbal tic unique to Vinay. But the behavior was the anomaly. The real Vinay was famously reserved. This figure was philosophical, advising the girls to stop the constant rush of their lives and to trek for liberation rather than just a living. The entity possessed Vinay's exact physical and vocal blueprint, but appeared to operate with an entirely different consciousness. By 3 a.m., the realization of what they had seen, combined with freezing winds slicing through the tent, made sleep impossible. The group walked through the meadow to seek warmth by the fireplace inside the abandoned cottage. Every step was a task, accompanied by the sound of a wolf howling in the distance. They stepped into the stone structure, leaving the creaky wooden door wide open to ensure they weren't trapped inside. Suddenly, a massive gust of wind struck the heavy wooden door. It slammed shut, locking them in the dark. Between the figure outside and the sudden violence of the door, the camp had become a place where physical safety and psychological certainty no longer existed. There are 3 ways to categorize what happened that night. The first is a case of mistaken identity, perhaps a lost hiker or a shepherd wandering near the camp. However, this diagram shows the mathematical difficulty of that theory. The odds of a stranger independently possessing Vinay's voice and stutter while wearing the same sapphire jacket and carrying the same dual camera setup are statistically negligible. The second possibility is a shared hallucination. Notice how the brain responds to these conditions. High altitude, freezing temperatures, and physical exhaustion can trigger sensory distortions. The brain tries to make sense of dark shadows by projecting familiar details onto shapes that aren't actually there. The third is a supernatural explanation, a spirit tied to the ancient serpent temple or the abandoned cottage. Because there is no data to prove or disprove any of these, the encounter remains an open mystery. At 5 a.m., the group fled the camp to push for the summit in pitch darkness, following their guide up the icy trails. The fear finally broke when the first rays of the sun hit the snow-clad peaks. They reached a point that looked in the morning light like heaven. This is the reality of the Himalayas. They are environments where the same landscape that provides absolute clarity at sunrise can hours earlier leave the mind unable to trust its own senses. The hikers still occasionally ponder the mystery of that night. It wasn't a story they could simply leave behind at the base of the mountain. Arti and Rishika still remember every word of the conversation. For them, it wasn't a fleeting trick of the light, but a direct, interactive experience. If you ever trek Nag Tibba under a full moon, keep a watch for a man with 2 cameras sitting by the old cottage. Stepping into the wilderness does more than strip away the noise of modern life. It leaves us entirely vulnerable to the unknown.